Hi everyone, this is Tali Arcandesi, the Director of the Center for Writing and Speaking at Ursinus, and I'm going to spend a few minutes to talk to you about working with sources, specifically about integrating and analyzing quotations. Integrating quotations is relatively straightforward, so there's basically just two pieces of advice. Your goal is to integrate a quotation smoothly. In other words, you should include some introductory phrases that lead into your quotation. And a way to think about doing this is just to avoid dropping in the quotation as its own sentence. So a quotation shouldn't be a standalone sentence. It should always be introduced with some of your own words. So that's it. It's pretty simple to follow. As long as you're aware of it, I think you can do it. So look at these two examples. Pause the video just to read them real quick. The one on the left is an example of a dropped-in quote. It has a sentence written by the student, and then a period, and then it starts a quotation from the text. This is the kind you want to avoid. This one is a lot more smooth. A 2003 New England Journal of Medicine study of chipmunk metabolism concluded that, quote, the metabolic rates of adult chipmunks decline rapidly, etc. This looks a lot smoother. It shows that the student is sort of in charge or under control, has the quotation under control, and it's a lot better. So try to do more ones like the one on the right. So here's an example of a dropped-in quotation. In his short story Little Things, Raymond Carver clearly shows a conflict between the two characters. A couple is fighting over custody of their baby. Quote, she would have it, this baby. She grabbed for the baby's other arm. She caught the baby around the wrist and leaned back. But he would not let go. He felt the baby slipping out of his hands and he pulled back very hard. So see how there's a dropped-in quotation here. We're a sentence by the student, a period, and then a quotation from the text. You want to integrate the quotation a little more smoothly. So look at some alternatives. Imagine the student kept these first two sentences, and then right in here just put this signal phrase, Carver writes, or according to Carver, or according to the narrator, or the narrator describes. Any sort of really brief phrase just to integrate the quotation with your own words a little more clearly is better. And note also that the original, this dropped-in quote doesn't have a citation. It doesn't say what page it's from. And here's how you do a citation. You have no punctuation except the quotation mark, and then a space, a parentheses, the page number, and the parentheses, and a period. That's if you're using MLA style. Even better though, revision would actually break up this quote a bit. The student doesn't, this is a long quote, and it's a common mistake to sort of overquote. You don't really need that long of a quotation to make your point. You only need to quote the parts of the text that are really important and that really help you make your point and that are impossible to be paraphrased, impossible to be put in your own words. So instead of this whole thing, you might even consider just keeping the same two sentences and then having something like this. Carver writes that the mother, quote, grabbed the baby while the father, quote, pulled back very hard, and then the citation there too. So now let's practice this a little bit. If you have an accompanying worksheet, go to exercise 1 on the first page. What I give you here is a quotation from a text, and then two different ways that you can integrate the quotation a little bit better. So the sort of the easiest way, just putting in a signal phrase at the beginning so that you're introducing the quote with some of your own words, and a sort of the better way so that you're only using the most essential parts of the text. So pause the video right now, take a second to complete exercise 1 of the worksheet. Okay, now I want us to talk for a minute about something a little more complex and difficult, which is sort of what you do around the quotation, specifically after you give a quotation, which is to analyze it. So things to think about avoiding when you're doing analysis is just restating what the text says. So restatement, like what Plato is saying here is that it's difficult to leave the cave. that doesn't quite raise to the level of analysis. Sometimes when you give a quotation, you do have to restate afterwards what it means, because sometimes, or sort of what it says, because sometimes, especially in a class like CIE, the text itself is very complicated and difficult to understand, so you can put it in your own words, but then you have to go on to also analyze it. And also, you don't want to just reduce a quotation to a cliche. So what Plato is saying here is, home is where the heart is. Plato is saying something more complex than just a sort of overused saying. So, avoid cliches in your paper in general, but also don't think that they count as analysis. So, I've said what it's not. What is analysis? And here's some ways to think about it. Analysis pushes beyond cliches and mere restatement, and instead it points out something that is unexpected or something that is interesting. An analysis uncovers hidden values or shows a unique perspective on the reading. So after you just say what the quotation is, sometimes you need to restate it, but then you have to go a little beyond and just point out something about that quotation that is unique or odd or that someone wouldn't see the first time around. So here's an example. Your quotation, which is nicely integrated, Krishna advises Arjuna to, quote, "First restrain your senses, Arjuna, then kill this evil that ruins knowledge and judgment." And then here's a restatement. In other words, Arjuna should limit the influence his bodily sensations and desire have over his decisions. But you need to push beyond that a little bit and say something like this. Far from suggesting that Arjuna ignore his body altogether, Krishna just urges him to restrain or control his senses. The evil that he should kill completely is desire. So this example of analysis takes something that maybe the first time you see this quotation you would think that Arjuna is telling him to ignore his body. But the analysis says, like, that's a little bit too simple. And I'm pointing out something more complex about the quote. That's good analysis. So here's another one. In other words, while our intuition might always lead us to make some mistakes, we must remain cognizant of the common pitfalls of intuition. So this restates what the quote says. The actual analysis points out something unexpected. Kahneman does not advocate constantly second-guessing oneself, but instead only consulting System 2 thinking in high-priority situations when a mistake would be particularly damaging. So it's sort of saying a little more, pointing out something that you wouldn't necessarily immediately see from the text. That's analysis. All right, so let's look at some good and bad examples sort of from real life, things you might have heard before outside of an academic context. So think of this idea. You just have to follow your heart in situations like this. That might be good advice, but it's not analytical. It's not good advice because it's just a cliche. But now look at this example from real life. Maybe you always date bossy, controlling men because you're not confident enough to make decisions for yourself. So this is analysis because it observes a trend and suggests a reason for it. So it's more analytical advice, kind of digs a little deeper, goes a little further, and points out something unexpected. If that doesn't do it for you, let's think about sports. If you ever watch any sports, you know that the people are talking, the commentators are talking through the whole game. And sometimes they say things that are like not very good analysis. Like, this kid plays with a lot of heart. That's just a cliche. Or, the Eagles have not scored any touchdowns in this game. They need to get some points on the board. This is just an observation about what's happening. It's just restating what you see already in the game. But sometimes they also give really good analysis, like this. The Eagles have not scored any touchdowns in this game because they've been unable to convert in the red zone. So, of course, you would notice that they haven't scored, but you might not notice that it's because they're not converting in the red zone. So good analysis points out something that may not have been noticeable to the casual observer. And here's even better analysis. You can't criticize the quarterback for an unsuccessful passing game if he doesn't have support from the backfield. If there's no threat of a running game, the defense can easily stop any pass attempts. So This points out an underlying cause to the thing that's being observed, and it also overturns an unexpected interpretation. You might say this quarterback has no completions, so he's a bad quarterback, but this person is pointing out that there's more to it than that. And so that's really good analysis. So, when you're writing your paper, how can you get from the sort of like cliches or just mere observations or just mere restatements to that actual in-depth analysis? Here's a key. You find a really important passage from the text, you know it's really meaningful, and you know you have to analyze it. Ask yourself some of these questions. What does this passage mean? Why does it matter? How does it relate to the author's other ideas? How does it relate to the CIE questions? How does it relate to other readings from CIE or other ideas I've heard of? What is unexpected or interesting about this? What words from the passage are particularly significant and why? These are all questions that, if you answer just one of them, that can lead you to good analysis. So, with all these things in mind, turn to your worksheet. This is a really challenging exercise, but if you can do this well, your papers will really improve. So what I did is I gave you two sources. One is a quotation from Plato, and the other is a quotation from Freud. And what I'm asking you to do is really carefully read the quotation, and then first of all simply restate it, like paraphrase it, put it in your own words. But then second of all, analyze it. Do what we've been talking about. Bring it sort of to that higher or deeper level by answering one of the questions that's given. And then do the same thing with Freud, and then you're done your worksheet. So pause the video right now to work on your worksheet. Finally, here's an acknowledgement of the sources of one of the examples. And I wanted to remind you about the Center for Writing and Speaking. You can get further help on any writing and speaking project you're working on at Ursinus by just clicking on this link, making an appointment with one of our writing fellows who will sit down with you for up to an hour and just give you advice about your writing. It's a great resource that you should consider using as much as possible. Thank you for your time.